For 5 years, this question has lived in the margins, whispered in comment sections, debated in private group chats, dismissed by mainstream media as conspiracy theory, as madness, as the fevered imagination of people who simply don't like Meghan Markle. But here's the thing about questions that won't die. They don't die because they were never properly answered. And now, in what can only be described as a seismic shift in the landscape of royal commentary, sources inside Buckingham Palace, medical professionals adjacent to the royal household, and veteran royal correspondents are doing something unprecedented. They're talking, not in hypotheticals, not in carefully worded non-denials. They are, for the first time, directly addressing the single most explosive allegation ever leveled at a member of the British royal family in the modern era. Did Meghan Markle fake her pregnancies? Were Archie and Lilibet born through undisclosed surrogacy? And if so, did Prince Harry know? October 15, 2018. Kensington Palace announces that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex are expecting their first child. Meghan is reportedly 12 weeks along, which would place conception around late July 2018, just 2 months after the royal wedding. Now, that's perfectly plausible. No one questions the announcement itself. What people began questioning, almost immediately, was the visual evidence. Over the following months, Meghan Markle appeared at dozens of public engagements, and something strange happened. Something that seasoned royal watchers, midwives, obstetricians, and millions of women who have actually been pregnant began to notice. Her bump didn't behave like a bump. Now, before the defenders rush in with accusations of body shamming, let me be clear. Every woman carries differently. Every pregnancy is unique. That is an absolute, undeniable medical fact. But there are certain biomechanical realities of pregnancy that are not optional. They are governed by physics, by anatomy, by the simple reality of a human being growing inside another human being. The uterus expands in a specific direction. The center of gravity shifts. The way a woman sits, stands, bends, these change not because of vanity, but because of structural necessity. And yet footage from this period shows Meghan Markle doing things that made experienced mothers around the world tilt their heads, bending at the waist, fully, at what was reported to be 7 months pregnant, sitting with her legs crossed tightly at 8 months. The bump appearing to shift position dramatically between appearances, sometimes high, sometimes low, sometimes seemingly absent altogether. And then there was the footage that broke the internet. A video clip viewed millions of times in which Meghan, wearing a fitted dress, appears to sit down and the bump, visibly, unmistakably, folds. Now I want to be fair here. Fabric does strange things on camera. Angles distort. Compression artifacts in video can create illusions. All of that is true. When you combine that single clip with the totality of the visual evidence, the collapsing bump, the shifting bump, the sometimes there sometimes not bump, you are left with a body of evidence that at minimum demands an explanation, and no explanation has ever been offered, not once. Not from Meghan, not from Harry, not from the palace. Silence, and in the royal world, silence is never accidental. Silence is policy. On May 6, 2019, Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor was born. Allegedly at Portland Hospital in London. I say allegedly not to be provocative, but because the circumstances surrounding this birth were unlike anything in modern royal history. Every senior royal birth in living memory has followed a well-established protocol. The mother enters the hospital. The press is stationed outside. Medical staff from the royal household are present. A formal bulletin is posted on the easel at Buckingham Palace. There are photographs within hours. There is transparency, not because the royals enjoy it, but because public accountability is the price of public funding. Meghan and Harry broke every single one of these conventions. There was no press presence at the hospital. There was no confirmation of which hospital was even used until after the fact. The royal medical team, the physicians who have attended royal births for decades, were reportedly sidelined. Meghan and Harry brought in their own private medical team, whose identities were never publicly confirmed. Think about that for a moment. The British taxpayer funds the royal family. The sovereign grant pays for their security, their residences, their staff. And yet when it came to the birth of a child who was at that point seventh in line to the throne, the public was told, effectively, none of your business. The birth certificate itself raised eyebrows. It was amended twice. Meghan's name was changed. Details were altered. The palace offered no public explanation for why a legal document recording the birth of a royal child needed to be revised. And then there was Harry's own comment. This is the moment that for many observers changed everything. Standing before the cameras just hours after Archie's birth, Prince Harry, beaming, seemingly genuine, said something extraordinary. He said the baby had changed so much in the 2 weeks since, and then caught himself. 2 weeks. The baby was supposedly hours old. Now defenders have offered several explanations. He misspoke. He was nervous. He was sleep deprived. He meant something else entirely. And perhaps any one of those explanations is true. But when a father describes a newborn as having changed over the last 2 weeks, and that newborn is supposedly less than a day old, the simplest explanation is not a nervous slip. The simplest explanation is that he had been looking at a baby for 2 weeks. A baby that was already born. A baby that had arrived via a surrogate. A baby that needed time to be integrated into the household before being presented to the world. And this is where the new evidence reportedly comes in, according to multiple reports now circulating in the British press. And I want to stress, these are sourced from credible royal correspondents with established track records. Members of the Buckingham Palace household staff have begun providing testimony regarding what they observed during Meghan's time as a working royal. And what they observed is deeply troubling. Staff members have reportedly stated that they never once saw Meghan exhibit physical symptoms of pregnancy that are, frankly, impossible to hide when you live in close quarters with dozens of employees. No morning sickness witnessed by any household staff. No dietary changes managed by the kitchen. No visits from midwives or obstetricians to Nottingham Cottage or Frogmore Cottage during the times when such visits would have been routine and expected. One source, described as a senior member of the household, reportedly stated, and I quote, "We were told she was pregnant, we congratulated them, but none of us ever saw any evidence of it beyond the bump that appeared at public events." Now let me be clear about what this is and what this isn't. This is not proof. This is testimony. It is the recollection of individuals who were present, who had daily access, and who are now, years later, choosing to speak. The question is, why now? And this is where the story takes its most intriguing turn. There is a theory, and it is more than a theory, it is practically an open secret in royal circles, known as Operation Thaw. The premise is simple. The royal family wants Harry back, not Meghan. Harry, King Charles, is agging. He has been public about his cancer diagnosis. William and Harry's relationship remains fractured. The monarchy's future stability benefits enormously from reconciliation with the spare, but only if the spare can be separated from the influence that drove him away. And what better way to separate them than to allow, or even quietly encourage, the emergence of evidence so devastating that Meghan's credibility is destroyed beyond recovery. If it were proven, or even widely believed, that Meghan committed birth fraud, the implications would be staggering. Not just for her reputation, but for the legitimacy of Archie and Lilibet's place in the line of succession, for the validity of their titles, for the legal standing of Meghan herself within the royal family structure. It would give Harry grounds, sympathetic grounds, to walk away from the marriage, not as a traitor to the crown, but as a victim, a man who was deceived, a prince who can come home. Is that what's happening here? Are we watching the controlled demolition of Meghan Markle? If the questions surrounding Archie's birth were a tremor, the circumstances of Lilibet Diana's arrival were an earthquake. June 4, 2021. Lilibet is born at Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital in California. By this point, Meghan and Harry have left the royal family, relocated to Montecito, and are operating entirely outside the British establishment's oversight. And the visual questions only intensified. Meghan's pregnancy with Lilibet was announced in February 2021, accompanied by a single black and white photograph taken by their friend, photographer Misan Harriman. In the image, Meghan is lying in Harry's lap, barefoot, with what appears to be a visible bump, but here's what's notable. This was essentially the only photographic evidence of the pregnancy that the public received. Throughout the following months, Meghan appeared at very few public events. When she did, including her bombshell interview with Oprah Winfrey in March 2021, she was seated, draped in flowing fabric, and the bump was present but oddly inconsistent with what would be expected at her stated gestational timeline. Midwives and medical professionals took to social media to point out that during the Oprah interview, the apparent size and position of the bump didn't align with someone who was, at that point, roughly 6 months pregnant, and then Lilibet arrived, and the silence was deafening, no photographs for months. The first image of Lilibet was released on her first birthday, a full year after her birth. That is, by any standard, extraordinary for a couple who had built their entire post-royal brand on media exposure. If Meghan Markle had carried and delivered these children herself, a woman who documented her life in relentless detail, who invited cameras into her home for a Netflix series, who shared intimate moments with Oprah before a global audience of 50 million people, why would she hide the single most powerful, sympathetic, humanizing experience a woman can have? The answer that her supporters offer is privacy. She wanted privacy, but this is a woman who has never wanted privacy. Not once, not ever. Privacy is the one thing Meghan Markle has never sought. She sought platforms. She sought audiences. She sought influence. Privacy was what she accused the royal family of using against her, a gilded cage, she called it. So why, when it came to the births of her children, the moments that would have generated the most public sympathy, the most goodwill, the most connection with ordinary women around the world, did she pull the curtain closed, unless there was something behind that curtain she couldn't show? And now we arrive at the most significant development in this entire saga. Reports are emerging, and they are being treated with unusual seriousness by mainstream outlets, that medical professionals connected to the royal household have begun to break their silence. Now, medical confidentiality is sacrosanct. No legitimate physician would directly disclose a patient's records, but what we're seeing is something more subtle and arguably more damning. Doctors and midwives who were part of the royal medical establishment during the relevant period are making carefully worded public statements. Statements that, while not directly accusing anyone of anything, pointedly describe what standard royal birth protocol entails, and then note with unmistakable implication that those protocols were not followed. One senior obstetrician, speaking to a British broadsheet, stated, "In any royal birth, there is a chain of medical custody. Records are created, witnessed, and archived. The absence of such records for any royal birth will be profoundly irregular. Absence of such records, read that again, they're not saying the records are sealed. They're not saying the records are private. They're implying the records may not exist. If that is true, if the standard medical documentation for Archie and Lilibet's births within the royal framework does not exist, then we are not dealing with a privacy preference. We are dealing with a cover-up. And cover-ups have a way of unraveling. They unravel because too many people know, because staff talk, because documents surface, because someone somewhere decides that the truth matters more than the lie. And here is where this story stops being about Meghan Markle's vanity and starts being about something far more serious. If, and I stress if, these children were born via surrogate and that fact has been concealed, then Archie and Lilibet are victims. Full stop. They are children who will one day grow up and discover that their origin story was fabricated, that the foundational narrative of their existence, told to them by their own parents, was a performance, a fiction maintained for public consumption and personal brand management. The psychological literature on this is unambiguous. Children who discover late in life that their biological origins were concealed suffer profound identity crises. Trust is shattered, not just in their parents, but in their own sense of self. And for what? For what was this deception, if it is a deception perpetrated for image, for the narrative of a fairy tale? For the Instagram perfect story of a biracial American woman marrying a prince and bearing his children in a seamless photogenic journey, if this is fraud, it is not a victimless fraud. The victims are 6 and 3 years old, and they live in a mansion in Montecito, and they have no idea what's coming. And let's not forget Harry in all of this, because there are really only 2 possibilities when it comes to the Duke of Sussex, and neither of them reflects well on him. Either Harry knew and participated in a deliberate, sustained deception of the British public, the royal family and the world, or Harry didn't know. And if Harry didn't know, then the man who sat beside Meghan at every public appearance, who held her hand as she cradled a bump that may not have been real, who stood before cameras and spoke of his newborn son changing over 2 weeks, that man was himself a victim of the woman he married, and that is perhaps the most devastating possibility of all. Because it would mean that Meghan Markle looked into the eyes of her husband, a man who had already lost so much, who had buried his mother at 12 years old, who had spent his adult life searching for belonging and love, and she lied to him about the most fundamental thing 2 people can share: the creation of a family. I want to close with an observation that I think captures this entire saga more precisely than any forensic analysis ever could. If Meghan Markle had been pregnant, truly, undeniably, visibly pregnant, and had given birth to Archie and Lilibet in the way that billions of women throughout human history have given birth to their children, she would have shown you, she would have shown everyone. This is a woman who showed us her refrigerator, her garden, her dogs, her journal entries, her therapy sessions, her arguments with palace staff, her grievances, her tears. She showed us everything. Except the one thing that would have silenced every critic, answered every question, and settled every doubt permanently and forever. She showed us everything, except proof. And in the end, that silence speaks louder than any denial ever could. Louder than any carefully crafted statement from a Montecito publicist. Louder than any sympathetic interview on American television. Louder than any Netflix documentary framed around her own victimhood. The silence around these births has been deafening from the very beginning. And now, finally, the people who were there, the staff, the doctors, the insiders who watched this story unfold from the inside, are finding their voices. From her earliest days in Hollywood, she understood that in a world saturated with beautiful, talented, ambitious women, the ones who rise are not necessarily the most gifted. They are the ones who control their own story. She maintained a lifestyle blog called The Tig, where she curated an aspirational identity years before personal branding became the cultural currency it is today. She understood instinctively that what people believe about you matters infinitely more than what is actually true about you. She leveraged that understanding at every turn. She leveraged it when she positioned herself as a humanitarian. She leveraged it when she navigated her way into Harry's social circle. She leveraged it when she stepped onto the world stage as a royal bride and immediately began reframing the monarchy's relationship with modernity, diversity, and relevance. And here is the critical thing to understand: none of that is inherently wrong. Ambitious people manage their narratives, politicians do it, celebrities do it, corporations spend billions doing it. The problem arises when the narrative management crosses a line, when it stops being spin and starts being fraud. When the story you are telling the world is not a polished version of the truth, but a wholesale replacement of it. And that, according to a growing body of evidence that is now impossible to dismiss, is precisely what happened with Meghan Markle's pregnancies. I want to walk you through something that I think illuminates the entire surrogacy question more effectively than any discussion of baby bumps or birth certificates. I want to walk you through what Meghan Markle did not do. Because sometimes the most revealing evidence is not what's present, it's what's absent. When Kate Middleton was pregnant with Prince George, she suffered from hyperemesis gravidarum, severe, debilitating morning sickness that required hospitalization. It was not glamorous. It was not photogenic. It was raw and difficult and very, very real, and the public saw it. Not because Kate invited them in, but because pregnancy is a physical reality that cannot be entirely managed or concealed. When Kate was pregnant with Charlotte and Louis, the same condition recurred. the same hospitalizations, the same visible, undeniable physical reality of a woman whose body was going through something enormous and demanding and transformative. Now consider Meghan. Not a single report of morning sickness, not one account from any member of staff, and remember, these households employ dozens of people who are present at all hours, of Meghan exhibiting any of the standard physical symptoms of early pregnancy. No dietary restrictions communicated to the kitchen. No adjustments to her schedule in the first trimester that would indicate the crushing fatigue that the majority of pregnant women experience. No midwife visits documented at the residences. No prescription records. No hospital check-in records that have ever been independently verified. Nothing. Meghan Markle sailed through 2 pregnancies, without apparently experiencing a single moment of visible physical difficulty. She appeared at public engagements glowing and composed and perfectly styled right through what should have been the most physically demanding months of her life. Now I ask you, in the history of your own life, how many pregnant women have you known? How many mothers, sisters, colleagues, friends? And of all of those women, how many of them managed 2 full-term pregnancies without a single visible symptom, without a single bad day, without a single moment where their body betrayed the enormous physical work it was doing? The answer for most people is 0. And for Meghan Markle, the answer appears to be 2. There is a name that keeps surfacing in conversations among royal insiders, and it is a name that has not yet broken into mainstream coverage in a significant way. But it will, because the people who know this name and know what role this individual allegedly played in the Sussex household during the relevant period are beginning to talk. I'm not going to name this individual. Not yet. Not until the evidence is more firmly established in the public record. But what I will tell you is this. According to sources with direct knowledge of the Sussex household operation during the period spanning 2018 through 2021, there was a woman, a private individual, not a public figure, who had unusual and sustained access to Frogmore Cottage during Meghan's reported pregnancies. Her presence was explained to staff through a series of shifting cover stories. First, she was described as a wellness consultant, then as a personal assistant, then as a family friend. Her actual role, according to these sources, was never formally defined to anyone within the household. Now I want to be careful here. An unnamed woman with unexplained access to royal residence could mean many things. It could be entirely innocent. People in positions like Meghan's have complicated support networks. But in the context of everything else that surrounds these births, the anomalous bump behavior, the sidelined royal medical team, the absence of standard documentation, Harry's extraordinary slip about the 2-week-old newborn, an unnamed woman with shifting cover stories and sustained private access takes on a very different significance. People are asking questions, and the answers are not forthcoming. Let us talk about the Oprah interview for a moment, because I think it deserves far more scrutiny than it has received. March 7, 2021. Meghan and Harry sit down with Oprah Winfrey in what becomes the most watched and most discussed television interview of the decade. The declared purpose of the interview is to tell their truth, to speak freely, finally, without the constraints of royal protocol, and Meghan does speak freely, at extraordinary length, about everything, about feeling suicidal within the palace, about being denied help, about conversations regarding the color of her unborn child's skin, about isolation and betrayal and institutional racism, about the ways in which the monarchy had failed her. She spoke about all of it, with tears, with pauses for effect, with the practiced emotional precision of someone who has spent years in front of cameras. And yet, at no point during that interview, an interview explicitly designed to strip away all pretense and speak unfiltered truth, did Meghan Markle describe the experience of carrying her children, of feeling them move, of the physical journey of pregnancy and birth, of labor, of delivery, for a woman who used every other intimate detail of her life as ammunition in a case she was building against the institution she had left. The absence of this particular detail is extraordinary. Women who have genuinely experienced pregnancy and childbirth speak about it, constantly, involuntarily, It is one of the most physically and emotionally overwhelming experiences a human body can undergo. It changes you at a cellular level. It becomes reference point, comparison, metaphor. It becomes part of the way you see everything else. Meghan Markle, in an interview spanning nearly 2 hours, in which she discussed her mental health, her diet, her wardrobe choices, her relationship with the Queen, her fears about her son's future, somehow found no occasion to speak about what it actually felt like to be pregnant. Not once. And then there is the matter of Lilibet's name. When Meghan and Harry announced that their daughter would be named Lilibet Diana, Lilibet being the private family nickname for Queen Elizabeth, Diana being the name of Harry's beloved late mother, the public and the press received it as a gesture of reconciliation, a peace offering from California, a sign that despite everything, Meghan and Harry retained love and respect for the institution and the people they had left behind. But palace sources tell a different story. According to multiple accounts from people with direct access to the Queen's household during this period, Her Majesty was not consulted about the use of her private nickname before the announcement was made. She learned about it, as the rest of the world did, through the media. Now, why does this matter in the context of the surrogacy question? Because it reveals something important about how Meghan Markle operates. She understood that naming a child Lilibet would generate enormous positive coverage. It would make the surrogacy question disappear beneath a wave of sentiment. It would reframe the narrative from one of estrangement and suspicion to one of reconciliation and love. It was, in other words, a strategic deployment of a child's name. If Meghan was capable of using her daughter's name as a public relations instrument, and the evidence strongly suggests she was, then the question of whether she was capable of fabricating the pregnancy itself becomes considerably less far-fetched. Because both things at their core represent the same impulse, the same ruthless prioritization of narrative over reality, the same willingness to use the most intimate details of family life as tools in a larger game. Now, let us address the question that sits at the very heart of this scandal. The question that, depending on the answer, changes everything. What did Harry know? Because this is a binary situation. There is no comfortable middle ground. Either Harry was aware that his children were carried by a surrogate and chose to participate in a sustained public deception, standing before cameras at hospital steps, speaking to journalists about his growing family, writing about fatherhood in his memoir with what certainly appeared to be genuine emotional authenticity, or Harry had no idea. And if Harry had no idea, then we need to sit with what that actually means. It means that the woman he married, the woman he abandoned his family for, the woman for whom he walked away from the only life he had ever known, and the only identity he had ever had, that woman looked him in the eye every single day and lied to him about whether the children they were raising together had come from her body. It means that every tender moment Harry has described, feeling the baby move, the anticipation of birth, the first moments of holding his newborn son and daughter, either those moments were fabricated for public consumption, or Harry was himself deceived into believing they were real. And here is the saddest part of all of this. Harry's memoir Spare is saturated with references to his children, to the joy they bring him, to the way fatherhood has transformed him, to the fierce protectiveness he feels toward them. Whatever else one might say about Harry, and there is plenty to say, his love for Archie and Lilibet reads as genuine. It reads as the one uncomplicated, uncorrupted thing in a life that has been defined by complication and corruption. If Meghan deceived him about their origins, she did not just lie to the world. She lied to the one person who trusted her unconditionally. The one person who gave up everything because she asked him to. Operation Thaw is not a phrase that appears in official palace communications. It is not a policy document or a strategic brief that anyone has published. It is a concept that has been circulating in the tightly connected world of royal correspondence and palace-adjacent commentators for the better part of a year. The theory goes like this: the monarchy has a Harry problem, not a Meghan problem. The palace made its peace with Meghan's departure relatively efficiently. The institution is resilient. It has survived far worse than a difficult daughter-in-law. The Harry problem is different because Harry is blood. Harry is the son of a king. Harry is the brother of a future king. And Harry's estrangement, his physical removal to California, his public war on the institution, his alignment with Meghan's narrative of royal cruelty and institutional racism, represents a wound that does not heal cleanly. Every time Harry appears in the American press, framed as a truth-telling exile standing up to a corrupt establishment, it costs the monarchy something. Something small, perhaps, but cumulative. And cumulative damage over years and decades is how institutions begin to hollow out. Bringing Harry home, not physically necessarily, but emotionally and politically, would represent an enormous prize for the palace. It would neutralize the narrative. It would restore the family image. It would give Charles and William the reconciliation that both men, by all accounts, privately want. But Harry will not come home while Meghan is beside him. That much is apparent to everyone. So the question becomes, how do you remove Meghan from the equation? Not through confrontation, not through legal action, not through the kind of direct assault that would make Harry defensive and drive him further away. You do it by letting the truth emerge. You do it by allowing the insiders who have held their silence to finally speak, by permitting the documentary evidence to surface, by creating an environment in which the questions about Meghan's pregnancies become so loud, so persistent, so mainstream that they can no longer be dismissed as fringe commentary. You let the story tell itself. And then you wait for Harry to draw his own conclusions. I want to say something directly to the people watching this, who are inclined to dismiss everything I've said as baseless speculation, as the product of bias or agenda, or simple dislike of a woman who married outside the establishment's comfort zone. I understand that instinct. I genuinely do. Because the alternative, the possibility that this is all real, that a woman stood on the steps of Windsor Castle and lied to the world about carrying life inside her body, that she maintained that lie through months of public appearances and private interactions and intimate conversations with a husband who adored her. That alternative requires us to confront something deeply unsettling about human nature and its capacity for performance. Most of us prefer to believe that there are limits, that there are things so fundamental, so sacred, that even the most calculating person would not use them as instruments of deception. Motherhood, we want to believe, is one of those things, but history is littered with people who had no such limits, who understood that the most sacred things make the most effective lies, precisely because no one wants to believe they could be weaponized. The evidence accumulating around Meghan Markle's pregnancies does not prove surrogacy. I have said that clearly, and I will continue to say it clearly. What it proves is a pattern of concealment, anomaly, and contradiction that demands a level of public scrutiny that has, until now, been almost entirely absent from mainstream coverage. That scrutiny is arriving. Late, perhaps, but it is arriving, and here is what I believe will happen next. The questions will not go away. They will get louder. The palace insiders who have begun to speak will be followed by others. The medical professionals who have made carefully worded public statements will, as legal and professional pressures shift, become more specific. The documentary evidence, birth records, medical logs, hospital registration data, will either emerge or its absence will itself become the story. And Meghan Markle will be faced with a choice that she has, until now, managed to avoid. She will have to either produce the kind of unambiguous, independently verifiable evidence that settles these questions permanently, or she will have to continue saying nothing and watch as the silence speaks for her. Because that is the thing about a house of cards. You don't need a hurricane to bring it down. All you need is one card pulled from the wrong place at the wrong time. And from where I'm standing, watching this story develop in real time, it looks very much like someone has already found that card, and they're deciding right now whether to pull it. This story is far from over. Every development, every new piece of evidence, every source that steps forward, I will be here covering it. Subscribe, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and stay close, because the next chapter of this story is coming faster than anyone expected. And when it arrives, it will change everything. Meghan Markle spent over a decade as a working actress. She was not a star, she was a professional, and there is an important distinction between those two things that gets lost in the breathless coverage of her royal journey. Stars are discovered, professionals are built. A professional actress in the middle tier of the Hollywood system, which is precisely where Meghan operated for most of her career, develops a very specific set of skills. She learns to inhabit emotional states on demand. She learns to make the artificial appear authentic. She learns that the difference between a convincing performance and an unconvincing one is almost never about talent. It is about commitment, about the willingness to go all the way in, to leave no perceptible gap between the character and the performance. She also learns something that rarely gets discussed, but that anyone who has spent time in that industry will confirm without hesitation. She learns that audiences want to believe. This is the fundamental secret of performance. Not that actors deceive audiences, but that audiences participate in their own deception. They come to the theater, to the cinema, to the television screen, wanting the fiction to be real. The performer's job is simply to not break the spell. Meghan Markle understood this principle at a professional level before she ever set foot in a royal residence. And when the greatest performance opportunity of her life presented itself, not on a studio set but on the world stage, she applied everything she had learned. The question being asked now, with greater urgency than ever before, is whether that performance included fabricating a pregnancy. And then doing it again, let us examine something that has received almost no analytical attention despite being, in retrospect, one of the most significant moments of the entire Surrey saga. The baby shower, February 2019. Meghan Markle is approximately 7 months pregnant with Archie. Her close friend Amal Clooney organizes a lavish baby shower in New York City at the Markle Hotel. The event costs, by various estimates, somewhere between $300,000 and $500,000. Meghan flies to New York on a private jet. She stays in a luxury suite. She is photographed arriving and departing, glowing, radiant, impeccably styled. The bump is present. Visible, convincing from the angles available to photographers. Now here is what I want you to focus on, not the cost of the shower, which generated its own controversy given Meghan's public environmental advocacy. Not the guest list, which included several Hollywood luminaries with previous royal connections. I want you to focus on what a baby shower actually is, in cultural terms. A baby shower is a ritual of transition. It is a community's way of marking the passage of a woman from one state of being to another, from woman to mother. It is deeply symbolic precisely because it is anticipatory. It celebrates not what has happened, but what is about to happen. And in that context, consider what Meghan's New York baby shower represented strategically. It created an indelible public record of a pregnancy at a specific point in time. It generated hundreds of photographs documenting the bump, the celebration, the surrounding community of supportive women. It embedded in the public consciousness an image of Meghan as a pregnant woman in a way that no single public appearance could have achieved. It was, in other words, the most effective piece of pregnancy evidence in the entire Sussex archive, and it was entirely controlled. Every angle, every photograph, every guest, every moment of it was managed. Isn't that interesting? The one event that most powerfully documented the pregnancy was also the one event over which Meghan had absolute, total, personal control. There is a conversation happening right now in the medical community that has not yet broken through into mainstream coverage in the way it deserves. But those of us who follow these threads closely have been watching it develop for months. It begins with a simple question that obstetricians and midwives are increasingly willing to ask publicly. What would it actually take to fake a royal pregnancy? Now I want to be clear. The people raising this question are not cranks. They are not internet commentators working from their bedrooms. They are medical professionals with established credentials who are applying their clinical knowledge to a set of publicly documented anomalies and asking what those anomalies might indicate. And the answers they are arriving at are deeply uncomfortable. The consensus emerging from this community is essentially this. Faking a pregnancy for a private individual is extraordinarily difficult. The web of medical interactions, insurance records, employer documentation, family observation, and community involvement makes sustained deception nearly impossible over a full 9-month period. But faking a pregnancy for a public figure with significant financial resources, a tightly controlled inner circle, the ability to choose her own private medical team, and the authority to override institutional protocols that would normally create an independent documentary trail, that is a different proposition entirely. Every single structural safeguard that would normally make pregnancy fraud impossible either did not apply to Meghan's situation or was actively circumvented. She could choose her own doctors. She could restrict staff access to her private quarters. She could override the standard royal birth protocols that would have placed independent medical witnesses at the birth. She could control the photographic record of her pregnancy with a precision available to almost no other woman on earth. The medical community is not saying she did fake these pregnancies. What they are saying is that the structural opportunity was there in a way that it simply is not for ordinary people. And when you combine structural opportunity with the visual and circumstantial anomalies that have been publicly documented, you have the foundation of a case that demands serious investigation. I want to talk about money. Because money is almost always where the truth lives, and the financial dimensions of the surrogacy question have been almost entirely absent from the public conversation. Gestational surrogacy in the United States, California in particular, which has some of the most surrogate-friendly laws in the world, is an extraordinarily expensive undertaking. A full surrogacy arrangement, including agency fees, legal costs, medical costs, surrogate compensation, and ancillary expenses, typically costs between $100,000 and $150,000 per child. For most people, this is prohibitive. For Meghan and Harry, it is barely a rounding error on their Netflix deal, but money leaves traces. Surrogacy agencies maintain records. Legal arrangements require attorneys. Medical procedures generate documentation across multiple institutions. The financial architecture of a surrogacy arrangement is, by its nature, distributed across many different hands, which raises the question, if this happened, who else knows? And the answer, the uncomfortable, increasingly credible answer, is that several people know, and some of them are talking, not publicly, not yet. But in the way that information moves in tight, well-connected communities, through careful conversations, through trusted intermediaries, through the kind of selective disclosure that precedes full public revelation. The financial paper trail, according to sources who claim proximity to this story, exists. It has not yet been made public, but its existence is known to people in positions to know such things, and paper trails, unlike human memories, do not fade. They do not become less certain with time. They do not decide to stay loyal to the person they might implicate. They simply wait. Now I want to address something that I know is in the minds of a significant portion of the people watching this, the race question, because it is impossible to discuss criticism of Meghan Markle without acknowledging that some of the criticism she has received over the years has been racially motivated. That is true. It is documented. It is wrong, and I will not pretend otherwise. But here is what is equally true. The existence of racist critics does not immunize Meghan Markle from legitimate scrutiny. The fact that some people have attacked her for bad reasons does not mean that everyone who questions her is attacking her for bad reasons. This is a logical fallacy, the idea that because motive exists among some critics, all critics must share motive, and it has been weaponized with extraordinary effectiveness to shut down legitimate investigation. When a woman of any background, any race, any nationality, any social class potentially commits fraud that involves deceiving the public, deceiving her husband, and creating a false identity for 2 children who will one day be old enough to understand what was done, that fraud deserves to be examined. Full stop. The color of the woman's skin does not change the nature of the potential fraud, and anyone who argues otherwise is not defending Meghan Markle. They are defending the principle that certain people should be placed above accountability, and that is a principle that should make everyone deeply uncomfortable, regardless of where they stand politically. Accountability is not racism. Questions are not attacks. Evidence is not bigotry. And the people who have spent years conflating these things have done enormous damage, not just to this particular conversation, but to the broader capacity of the public to hold powerful people to account. There is a detail in Harry's memoir, Spare, that I have been thinking about for a long time. A detail that most reviewers passed over without comment, because in isolation it seems unremarkable. But in the context of everything we have been discussing, it takes on a weight that is very difficult to explain away. Harry writes about the moment he first held Archie. He describes the feeling in terms that are genuinely moving. The smallness of the baby, the weight of him, the overwhelming surge of emotion. But here is what he does not describe. He does not describe the birth. He does not describe being in the room. He does not describe the specific, visceral, unmistakable reality of watching a child come into the world. The sounds, the chaos, the moment of emergence, the first cry. These are the details that fathers who witness the births of their children carry with them forever. They are seared into memory with a vividness that time does not diminish. Every father who has stood in that delivery room and watched his child born will tell you that the experience is beyond the reach of adequate description, but they will try to describe it anyway, because it is the most significant thing they have ever witnessed. Harry, a man who devoted an entire memoir to the intimate texture of his emotional life, who described in granular detail experiences far less significant than the birth of his firstborn child. Harry does not describe watching Archie being born. He describes holding him afterward. He describes the emotion of holding him. But the birth itself, the room, the moment, the raw physical reality of it, is conspicuously, almost certainly, absent. Now perhaps that was a choice made out of respect for Meghan's privacy. Perhaps it was an editorial decision. Perhaps Harry simply felt that some things were too sacred to commit to the page. Or perhaps he wasn't there. Perhaps there was no room, no hospital, no moment of emergence to describe. Perhaps there was a phone call, a car journey, an arrival at a location where a baby was waiting. The children themselves deserve a place in this conversation, not as evidence, not as instruments of argument, but as human beings whose lives will be shaped, permanently and profoundly, by whatever the truth turns out to be. Archie is 6 years old. Lilibet is 3. They live in California with parents whose marriage is, by most accounts from people close to the situation, under enormous strain. They are growing up in a household defined by conflict. Conflict with the institution their father came from, conflict with the family their father was born into, conflict with the press, conflict with the truth. Children are extraordinarily perceptive. They absorb the atmosphere of their homes in ways that their parents often underestimate. They sense tension before they can name it. They feel the weight of unsaid things before they understand what those things are. Whatever Archie and Lilibet do not know right now, they are already on some level feeling. And if the worst of what is being alleged turns out to be true, if the story of their origin, the foundational myth of their own existence, was constructed rather than lived, then the day those children discover the truth will be among the most devastating days of their lives. Children who discover that their biological origins were concealed from them describe the experience in remarkably consistent terms across culture, across language, across context. They describe a feeling of ground disappearing beneath their feet, of looking back at their entire history and being unable to find a stable place to stand, of not knowing which memories are real and which were performances staged for their benefit. This is the human cost of the deception that is being alleged. Not the monarchy's embarrassment, not Harry's humiliation, not Meghan's public reputation. Two small children who did nothing wrong, who chose nothing, who had no say in any of this, and who will one day have to make sense of a story that may have been built on sand. Let me tell you what I think happens next. I think the next 6 months are going to be unlike anything we have seen in the Sussex saga so far. The combination of forces now aligned against Meghan Markle's version of events, palace insiders, medical professionals, financial investigators, documentary evidence, represents a convergence that cannot be managed through the usual tools of reputation management. A carefully worded statement will not answer specific medical questions. A sympathetic television interview will not produce birth records. A social media post about humanitarian work will not address the testimony of household staff. The only thing that answers these questions is evidence. Specific, verifiable, independently confirmable evidence. And Meghan Markle has had 5 years to produce it. She has not. Instead, what we have seen is an escalating pattern of distraction. New projects, new causes, new controversies manufactured at convenient moments. A restless, relentless forward motion that never pauses long enough to look back and answer the questions that have been waiting patiently since 2019. That forward motion is becoming harder to sustain. The questions are getting louder. The sources are becoming more specific. The documentary trail is getting closer to the surface. And somewhere in a mansion in Montecito, I suspect that a very intelligent, very calculating woman is very aware of all of this. The managed elements are remarkably consistent. The announcements align with the expected timeline. The public appearances, taken individually, show a woman who appears pregnant. The narrative arc, announcement, growing bump, birth, baby follows the expected shape of the story, but at the edges, at the places where Meghan's control was less complete, Harry's 2-week slip, the bump that folded on camera, the shifting position and size of the bump between appearances that were separated by only days. The absence of any independent medical record within the royal framework, the household staff who never witnessed a single symptom, the birth certificate that was amended twice without explanation, the first photographs of Lilibet released a full year after her birth. These are not the inconsistencies of lived experience. They are the inconsistencies of a managed fiction at the points where the management was imperfect, the consistency of concealment. And its telltale breaks. There is a woman at the center of this story who has received almost no public attention, and I believe her absence from the coverage is itself deeply significant. I am speaking of the woman who served as Meghan's personal assistant during the period spanning the 2 pregnancies. This individual, whose name has circulated in royal correspondence circles for some time, was, by all accounts from people who worked alongside her, present in the Sussex household at an extraordinary level of intimacy. She was not a peripheral figure. She was not one of many assistants cycling through a busy royal office. She was specifically and deliberately positioned at the center of Meghan's daily life during precisely the period when Meghan was supposedly carrying 2 children. Sources who have spoken to veteran royal correspondents describe this woman's role in terms that go well beyond standard personal assistant duties. She managed Meghan's schedule with a specificity that went to unusual lengths to control who had access to Meghan and when. She was reportedly responsible for communicating with Meghan's private medical team, the team brought in to replace the standard royal physicians, and for ensuring that those communications did not flow through the normal palace administrative channels. She was, in the language of operational security, a cutout. A human buffer between Meghan's private reality and the institutional machinery of the palace that would normally have created an independent documentary record of everything that was happening. Now this woman has not spoken publicly. She has not given interviews. She has maintained a silence that is, given the intensity of public interest in this story, somewhat remarkable for someone who was positioned so close to its center. But silence, as we have established, is never accidental in these circles, and the question being asked by people who know who she is and what she knows is a simple one. What is her silence costing? And who is paying for it? Let us talk about the Netflix documentary, December 2022. Harry and Meghan release a 6-episode documentary series on Netflix, positioned as their definitive account of their royal experience and their reasons for leaving. It is, by the metrics of streaming viewership, a significant success. It is also, by any measure of candor, a masterpiece of selective disclosure. The documentary is intimate in its presentation. It uses home footage, personal photographs, private conversations, the aesthetic language of radical transparency. It wants you to feel that you are seeing the real Meghan and Harry, the unguarded version, the truth behind the public performance. And in that context, consider what it includes about the pregnancies and births of the children. Photographs of Meghan appearing pregnant. Tender moments with the children presented as toddlers and infants. Emotional reflections on parenthood and family.
Please don't forget to subscribe to our The King YouTube channel to get more updates in the future. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a lovely evening, and we'll be back to see you tomorrow. Bye. I love you all.